This episode is presented to you in the form of an audiobook. At the end of the book of 2 Samuel, King David was old and weary. His reign had been long and full of victories, but also full of family troubles and national unrest. He had ruled over Israel for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. Despite his strength and legacy, David was now nearing the end of his life. His household had seen betrayals, especially the rebellion of his son Absalom. Though Absalom was gone, the pain lingered. Another son, Adonijah, was quietly watching and waiting. As David's strength faded, the question grew louder across the kingdom: who would take the throne after David? Now King David was very old. His body could no longer stay warm, even when they covered him with many blankets. His servants were worried about his condition. They thought a young virgin might help bring warmth to the king's body and perhaps revive his energy. So they searched throughout the territory of Israel to find the most beautiful young woman. Eventually, they found Abishag, a Shunammite. She was brought to the king, and though she lay beside him and took care of him, David had no sexual relations with her. This showed how weak he had become. As David lay on his deathbed, his son Adonijah, born to Haggith, began to exalt himself. He said within himself, "I will be king." He prepared for himself chariots, horsemen, and 50 men to run ahead of him, just like Absalom had done years earlier. This display of power was meant to look official and kingly. David had not disciplined or corrected Adonijah during his life, which perhaps gave Adonijah the boldness to act as he pleased. He was good-looking, just like Absalom, and he was born after him. Adonijah didn't act alone. He got support from powerful people: Joab, the commander of the army, and Abiathar the priest. Together they helped him plan and make sacrifices like a coronation ceremony. But some people did not follow him. Zadok the priest, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Ray, and David's mighty men remained loyal to David and did not support Adonijah. Adonijah went to the stone of Zoheleth near Onrogel and sacrificed sheep, cattle, and fattened calves. He invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, or Solomon, David's son, through Bathsheba. Nathan saw what was happening. He went straight to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. He said, "Have you not heard that Adonijah has made himself king, and our Lord David doesn't even know about it?" Nathan urged her to act quickly, or she and Solomon would be in danger. He told her to go into King David and remind him of the promise he made: "Surely your son Solomon shall be king after me." She was to ask David why Adonijah was acting like king when Solomon was the promised one. Nathan said he would come in after her and confirm her words. Bathsheba entered the king's room. David was lying in bed and Abishag was serving him. Bathsheba bowed down before him. David asked her what she wanted. She reminded him of his promise. "My lord, you swore to me by the Lord your God that my son Solomon would be king after you and would sit on your throne." Then she explained that Adonijah had made himself king and was celebrating with sacrifices and feasting. She said that all Israel's eyes were watching David, waiting for him to declare who the next king would be. She warned that if David didn't act, both she and Solomon would be treated like criminals once Adonijah took full power. While she was still speaking, Nathan the prophet entered. The king was told, "Nathan the prophet is here," and he bowed before the king. Nathan repeated everything Bathsheba had said and confirmed that Adonijah was celebrating with high officials and calling himself king. He said clearly that Adonijah had not invited him, Zadok the priest, or Solomon. Nathan then asked directly, Has my lord the king declared this? Did you say Adonijah shall be king after you?" David responded and called Bathsheba back in. He swore an oath. "As the Lord lives, who rescued me from every trouble, I will surely carry out what I swore to you, that Solomon shall reign after me." Then David gave instructions. He ordered that Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah take Solomon down to Gihon. Solomon was to ride the king's mule, a public and royal symbol. There, Zadok and Nathan were to anoint Solomon as king over Israel and blow the trumpet to announce it. Then the people were to shout, "Long live King Solomon!" David told them to bring Solomon back to sit on the throne so everyone would know Solomon was the chosen one. Zadok, Nathan, and Benaiah followed the command. They placed Solomon on David's mule and brought him to Gihon. Zadok took the horn of oil from the sacred tent and anointed Solomon. They blew the trumpet, and all the people shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" The people rejoiced with loud instruments and shouts. It was so loud that the earth seemed to shake with the sound. Back at Adonijah's feast, the celebration suddenly turned tense. Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, arrived. Adonijah welcomed him, expecting good news, but Jonathan told him the opposite. "Our Lord King David has made Solomon king." He described how Solomon had been taken down to Gihon, anointed by Zadok and Nathan, and made king with great joy. David had even bowed in worship on his bed, saying, "Blessed be the Lord, who has allowed me to see my son sit on my throne today." When Adonijah's guests heard this, they were terrified. They rose and scattered, each one going his own way. Adonijah, now afraid of Solomon, went to the altar and grabbed the horns, seeking mercy. Solomon was told that Adonijah feared him and was clinging to the altar. Solomon said, "If he proves himself to be a worthy man, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. But if wickedness is found in him, he will die." Then Solomon had Adonijah brought down from the altar, and Adonijah bowed before him. Solomon said, "Go to your home." As the days of King David's life drew to a close, the weight of the kingdom and the responsibility of the covenant began shifting. David, now an old and battle-worn king, summoned his son Solomon. With a voice marked by experience and urgency, he gave Solomon a solemn charge. "I go the way of all the earth," David said, acknowledging his mortality. "Be strong and show yourself a man." This was no casual advice from father to son. It was a final command from a king to his heir. David called Solomon to live by the law of the Lord. "Keep the charge of the Lord your God," he told him, "to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses." These were not just rules, they were the foundation of Israel's success. If Solomon obeyed, he would prosper in all he did. David reminded him of God's promise. If Solomon and his descendants stayed faithful, the throne of Israel would never lack a man from David's line. Then David's tone shifted. He began to speak about men who had acted against him, unfinished justice that Solomon would now have to deal with. "You know what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me," David said. Joab, though once a trusted commander, had turned against David's wishes. He had killed Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, both leaders of the army. These weren't acts of war. They were murders during times of peace. The blood they shed stained Joab's belt and his shoes. David instructed Solomon, "Do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. Justice, long delayed, had to be served." But not everyone was to be treated with severity. David spoke of Barzillai the Gileadite, a man who had shown him loyalty when he fled from Absalom. David urged Solomon to welcome Barzillai's sons at his table, honoring the kindness their father had shown. "Let them be among those who eat at your table," he said. Gratitude was to be remembered even after death. Then David mentioned Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim. During David's flight from Absalom, Shimei had cursed him with harsh words. Though David had promised not to kill him then, he had not forgotten. "You are a wise man," David told Solomon. "You will know what you ought to do to him, but bring his gray head down to the grave with blood." And then, quietly, the reign of one of Israel's greatest kings ended. David rested with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David. He had ruled for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. With his burial, an era closed. But the throne did not sit empty. Solomon, his son, sat upon it, and his kingdom was firmly established. But even with David gone, old ambitions were not. Adonijah, David's son, the same one who had tried to take the throne earlier, had not fully abandoned his desire. Now, with the appearance of peace, he approached Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, respectfully. She asked if he came in peace. "Yeah," he replied. "I have something to say to you." She gave him leave to speak. Adonijah then made a request, strange on the surface but heavy in meaning. "Please speak to King Solomon for me. He won't refuse you. Ask him to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." Abishag had been David's nurse in his final days. Though David never slept with her, she was considered part of the royal household. To marry her would be to claim a connection to David's throne. Bathsheba, perhaps unaware of the political weight of the request, agreed to speak to the king. Bathsheba entered Solomon's throne room. The young king rose from his throne, bowed to her as his mother, and had a seat placed at his right hand for her. It was a moment of respect. Then she said, "I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me." Solomon gently said, "Ask, mother, for I will not refuse you." Then she spoke the words, "Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to your brother Adonijah as wife." But Solomon immediately saw through the request. His expression changed. "Why do you ask Abishag for Adonijah?" he said. "You might as well ask the kingdom for him too. He is my older brother, and he has Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah on his side." Solomon understood that this wasn't a marriage proposal. It was a calculated political move. He rose and made a vow. "As the Lord lives, who established me and placed me on the throne of David my father, and who made me a house as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today." He summoned Benaiah son of Jehoiada, the trusted commander of the king's guard. Benaiah went out and struck down Adonijah, and he died. Next, Solomon turned to Abiathar the priest, who had supported Adonijah's earlier attempt to take the throne. Solomon said to him, "Go to your estate at Anathoth. You deserve death, but I will not kill you now, because you carried the ark of the Lord and suffered affliction with my father." Abiathar was spared, but he was exiled from the priesthood. This fulfilled the word of the Lord that had been spoken concerning the house of Eli back in the days of Samuel. But the news of Adonijah's death and Abiathar's exile reached Joab, and he understood his turn had come. Joab had not supported Solomon. He had stood by Adonijah. Afraid, Joab fled to the tent of the Lord and clung to the horns of the altar, just as Adonijah had done. Solomon was told, "Joab has fled to the tent of the Lord, and he is holding on to the altar." Solomon said, "Go, strike him down there." Benaiah went to the tent and said, "Come out." But Joab refused. "No," he said, "I will die here." Benaiah returned to the king and told him what Joab had said. Solomon said, "Do as he says. Strike him down and bury him. This will remove from me and my father's house the guilt of the blood Joab shed without cause." Solomon declared that the Lord would return Joab's bloody deeds on his own head, because he had murdered Abner and Amasa in cold blood, staining David's reign with blood he never commanded to be spilled. Benaiah went again, entered the tent of the Lord, and struck down Joab. He was buried in the wilderness of his own house. Then Solomon placed Benaiah son of Jehoiada in Joab's former position over the army, and Zadok the priest was given the office of priest in Abiathar's place. The power was shifting. The kingdom was being cleansed of those who had opposed the will of God. Lastly, Solomon addressed the unfinished matter of Shimei. He summoned him and said, "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem. Live here and do not go anywhere else. The day you cross the brook Kidron, you will surely die." Shimei agreed. "What you say is good," he said, and he remained in Jerusalem for many days. But after 3 years, 2 of Shimei's servants ran away to Gath. Shimei saddled his donkey and went to bring them back. He thought nothing of it, but when Solomon was told that Shimei had left Jerusalem and returned, he summoned him. "Did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you clearly?" Solomon asked. "You agreed. You said, 'What you say is good.' Why then did you not keep the oath you made?" Solomon reminded him of the evil he had done to David. "The Lord will return your wickedness on your own head," Solomon said. And then he gave the order. Benaiah was called again. He struck down Shimei, and he died. So the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. The enemies were removed. The promises were kept. The throne was secured. Solomon had now taken full control of the kingdom. The enemies of his throne had been removed, and the foundation of his rule was strong. But the true test of a king is not in war or in thrones. It is in the heart. As the chapter begins, Solomon was still a young man, stepping into the heavy shoes of his father David. Though the throne was his, the weight of leadership had only begun to press upon his shoulders. At the beginning of this new season, Solomon made a strategic alliance. He married the daughter of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. This marriage was not just about affection. It was a political decision to secure peace and build trust between Israel and one of the most powerful nations on earth. Pharaoh's daughter was brought to the city of David, where Solomon had her stay until he had finished building his own royal palace, the temple of the Lord, and the wall around Jerusalem. These projects would take time, and the city was still in the process of becoming the shining center of the nation. But even though Solomon was king, and even though his heart was leaning toward the Lord, there was one area still in transition. The people of Israel were still offering sacrifices at high places, hilltops and altars scattered throughout the land. This was because the temple of the Lord had not yet been built. Though David had desired to build it, the task had been left for Solomon. Until then, the people worshiped God where they could, often on hills that had been used for other religious practices before. Even so, Solomon loved the Lord. His heart was in the right place. He followed the instructions of his father David. But like the people, he too offered sacrifices on the high places. This reflected the tension of the moment, a sincere heart in a place of transition. God saw Solomon's devotion, but also saw what was coming next. Now among all the high places, Gibeon was the most important. It was a great site for worship, and Solomon went there to offer sacrifices to God. What happened next would define the rest of his reign. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar at Gibeon. It wasn't a casual visit or a routine ritual. It was an act of reverence, passion, and deep spiritual hunger. And that night, something extraordinary happened. The Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream. It wasn't just any dream, it was a divine encounter. And God said to him, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." This was a moment unlike any other. Imagine the God of heaven and earth appearing to you, asking what your heart desires most. Solomon could have asked for anything: power, riches, fame, or the lives of his enemies. But his response revealed the depth of his humility. Solomon replied, "You have shown great kindness to your servant David my father, because he was faithful to you and righteous in heart. And you have kept this great kindness by giving him a son to sit on his throne this day." Then Solomon's tone shifted. He admitted his weakness. "But now, O Lord my God, you have made me king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child. I don't know how to carry out my duties." It wasn't about age. Solomon was calling attention to his inexperience. He felt small under the weight of the crown. He continued, "Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number." He looked at the task ahead, the nation, the throne, the decisions, and asked for what his heart truly longed for. "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" What he asked for was not greatness, but wisdom, not wealth, but the ability to serve wisely. He didn't ask to benefit himself, but to carry out his duty as a faithful king. And this request pleased the Lord. God was moved by what Solomon asked. So he responded, "Since you have asked for this, not for long life, nor riches, nor for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked." God promised to give Solomon a wise and discerning heart, unlike anyone before or after him. But that wasn't all. God said, "Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings." And then God gave a condition. "And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as your father David did, I will give you a long life." And with that, Solomon awoke. It had been a dream, but one unlike any other. It was real. He rose and returned to Jerusalem. And when he arrived, he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. There he offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he held a great feast for all his officials. This was no private spiritual moment. It was a public celebration of God's calling on his life. But it wasn't long before Solomon's new gift of wisdom would be tested. Soon after, 2 women came to the king, both of them prostitutes living in the same house. They stood before the throne to present a painful and emotional case. One woman spoke, "My lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth while she was there with me. 3 days later, she also gave birth. We were alone. No one else was in the house, just the 2 of us." She continued, "During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while I was asleep. She laid her dead child next to me and put my living son next to her. Then she said, 'In the morning I tried to nurse my child, but he was dead. But when I looked at him closely, I saw it was not the son I bore, At this point, the second woman interrupted. "No, the living one is my son, and the dead one is yours." But the first woman insisted, "No, the dead one is yours, and the living one is mine." So they argued before the king. Here was the first great test of Solomon's discernment. There were no witnesses, no men, no midwives, only the two women. One child dead, one living, and no way to know who was telling the truth. Then Solomon said, "Bring me a sword." And his officials were shocked, but the sword was brought. The king then gave an order that shook the room. "Cut the living child in two and give half to one woman and half to the other." Immediately, the heart of the real mother was revealed. The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion. She cried out, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the other said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." Then Solomon spoke, with calm but final authority, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." And with that one judgment, the entire nation saw that God had truly given Solomon wisdom to administer justice. His fame spread. People heard of the king who could look into the heart of a situation and see what no eye could see. Solomon was not just a ruler. He was a judge, a leader, and a man whose wisdom had come from heaven. And the people of Israel stood in awe of the king because they recognized the hand of the Lord was with him. Now that Solomon had firmly taken his place as king over all Israel, his government began to take shape. He didn't rule alone. He established a leadership team, a structure of wise and trusted officials who helped carry out the administration of his vast and growing kingdom. The first name mentioned is Azariah, son of Zadok. He was the priest. This position was one of honor and spiritual responsibility. Though Zadok was still alive and respected, Azariah now served in this high office, continuing the line of faithful priests under Solomon's reign. Next, Solomon's inner circle included Elihoreph and Ahijah, the sons of Shisha. These two were secretaries or scribes in charge of recording the king's words, writing letters, keeping national records, and managing royal documents. Their work was quiet but crucial. Over the army was Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, the mighty warrior who had carried out many of Solomon's hard commands. Benaiah had proven his loyalty by executing Adonijah, Joab, and Shimei. He now served in the powerful and dangerous role of commander of the army. The priests included Zadok and Abiathar. Though Abiathar had been removed from active service for supporting Adonijah, his name was still mentioned, likely out of respect for his past faithfulness. Azariah, son of Nathan, was in charge of the district governors. These governors ruled over specific regions of Israel and were responsible for gathering supplies and taxes. Azariah, likely Solomon's cousin or nephew, being a son of Nathan, managed them all, ensuring their work flowed smoothly. Zabud, son of Nathan, another relative, served as a priest and as the king's trusted advisor, or friend, as some versions say. His position was intimate. He didn't just offer religious guidance, but likely gave the king counsel on personal and political matters. Ahishur was in charge of the palace, the steward who managed daily operations, household workers, and the inner functions of royal life. This role required great trust, as it involved managing the king's personal environment. Adoniram, son of Abda, was in charge of forced labor. This didn't mean slavery as we might understand it today, but rather the national service imposed for construction projects, helping to build the temple, the palace, and other government structures. Adoniram had to oversee thousands of workers and massive projects, balancing fairness with results. Beyond these top officials, Solomon appointed 12 district governors over all Israel. These men had a specific duty. Each of them was responsible for supplying provisions for the king and his royal household 1 month out of the year. Each district would take its turn, meaning the burden of supporting the court was shared equally across the land. The names and locations of these 12 governors were listed, showing how organized Solomon's kingdom had become. Ben-Hur governed the hill country of Ephraim. Ben-Decker was over Makaz, Shalbim, Beth-Shemesh, and Elon-Bethanan. Ben-Hesed ruled Arubboth and the surrounding towns of Soko and Hefer. Ben-Abinadab was over Naphoth Dor and was married to Taphath, one of Solomon's daughters, indicating how family ties were used to strengthen loyalty. Baana son of Ahilud governed Taanach, Megiddo, and Beth-Shean, which lay beside Zarethan below Jezreel, from Bethshean to Abel-Maholah and past Jokmeam. Ben-Gaber ruled Ramoth-Gilead, including the towns of Jair son of Manasseh in Gilead and the region of Argob in Bashan, known for its fortified cities with high walls and bronze bars. Ahinadab son of Iddo was in charge of Mahanaim. Ahimaaz ruled Naphtali, and he too married into the royal family. He had Basemeth, another of Solomon's daughters, as his wife. Baana son of Hushai governed Asher and Aloth. Jehoshaphat son of Peruah was over Issachar. Shimei son of Elah ruled over Benjamin. Gaber son of Uri governed the region of Gilead, the land once belonging to Sihon king of the Amorites and Og king of Bashan. He alone was the governor of that extensive territory. Each governor had his region and responsibility, and their work kept the kingdom running smoothly month after month. Now the writer pauses to show the results of all this structure and leadership. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. This was a direct fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. The people ate, drank, and were happy. There was peace, prosperity, and celebration across the land. Solomon's rule stretched far beyond the borders of traditional Israel. His dominion extended from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines and as far south as Egypt's border. All these nations brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. He wasn't just king of Israel. He was recognized as a powerful force throughout the region. Every day, the royal household had enormous food needs. Solomon's daily provisions included 30 cores of fine flour, that's roughly 180 gallons, 60 cores of meal, about 360 gallons, 10 fattened cattle, 20 pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep, in addition to deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. This abundance fed not just Solomon's family, but also officials, guards, servants, and guests. The palace was a place of constant activity and hospitality. Solomon had peace on every side. From Tifsa to Gaza, and throughout all the neighboring kingdoms there was no threat of war. The land rested under his leadership. Every family in Judah and Israel lived securely. Each person sat under their own vine and under their own fig tree, a poetic way of saying they lived in safety, peace, and prosperity. From Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, the whole land was blessed. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. These were not only symbols of power, but tools of diplomacy and defense. His military was well supplied and ready. The 12 governors delivered food each month, faithfully supplying everything needed for Solomon's table. They lacked nothing. They also brought barley and straw for the horses and war horses to the proper places, making sure every stable and chariot post was fully equipped. Then the writer speaks again about Solomon's most famous gift, wisdom. God gave him wisdom and very great insight, a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. His wisdom was greater than all the people of the East, greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. These were well-known wise men of the time, but Solomon surpassed them all. His fame spread to all the surrounding nations. Everyone had heard of the young king whose wisdom came straight from God. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. His wisdom wasn't just in politics, it was in poetry, philosophy, and praise. He studied nature and creation deeply. He described plants from the great cedar trees of Lebanon to the small hyssop that grows out of walls. He studied animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. His understanding covered every corner of creation. People from every nation came to hear Solomon's wisdom. Kings of the earth sent envoys, men who had heard of Solomon's name and came to learn from him. This was Solomon's kingdom, built not only on military strength or royal alliances, but on the wisdom of God that ruled from the throne to the smallest tree in the field. Now that the kingdom was at peace and Solomon's throne was secure, the king turned his heart toward the most important task of his reign, the building of the temple of the Lord. This was not just a construction project. It was the fulfillment of a sacred dream that began with his father, David. David had longed to build a house for the Lord, but God told him that it would be his son who would carry out this holy task. Now the time had come. When Hiram, king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king after David, he was pleased. Hiram had always loved David. He had been a loyal friend and ally to him. So Hiram sent a delegation to Solomon, reaching out in goodwill. Solomon replied with a message of his own. He reminded Hiram that his father David had wanted to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But David had been engaged in wars all around him. God had not allowed him to build because of the constant conflict. Solomon said, "But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune." Peace had opened the door for a purpose. Solomon declared his intention clearly. "I intend to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, just as the Lord told my father David." The promise was now being fulfilled through Solomon's obedience. Then Solomon requested Hiram. He asked him to supply cedar logs from Lebanon, the finest wood in the region. Solomon offered to have his workers partner with Hiram's loggers. "My men will work with yours," he said, "and I will pay whatever wages you set." He honored Hiram's skill and authority, saying, "You know that we have no one among us who can cut timber like the Sidonians." When Hiram received this message, he was overjoyed. He praised the Lord. "Blessed be the Lord today, who has given David a wise son to rule this great people." Hiram responded in kind. He sent a message back to Solomon saying, "I will do all you desire concerning the cedar and the juniper logs. My men will bring them down from Lebanon to the sea. I will make them into rafts to float by sea to the place you choose. Then I will have them broken apart, and you can carry them away. In return, you are to supply food for my royal household." So a formal agreement was made. Hiram provided all the wood Solomon requested, and Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat to feed his household, along with 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. These gifts were sent year after year, and the Lord gave Solomon wisdom just as he had promised. There was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and their alliance was strong. Now Solomon organized a massive labor force for the building project. He drafted 30,000 men from all of Israel. He sent them to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 each month, 1 month in Lebanon, 2 months at home. Over the entire workforce was Adoniram, the man in charge of conscripted labor. In addition, Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters working in the hills, along with 3,300 foremen overseeing the work and making sure everything was done properly. The workers quarried huge blocks of high-grade stone for the foundation of the temple. Solomon and Hiram's builders worked together along with men from Byblos, cutting and preparing the timber and stone. The building of the house of God had begun, not just with materials, but with unity, wisdom, and worship. Now came the moment that the entire nation had been waiting for. In the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord. This was not just a building. It was the dwelling place of God on earth. Every dimension, every stone, every piece of gold was part of a holy blueprint. The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. That's approximately 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The structure was rectangular and majestic. The portico, or entrance hall, in front of the main sanctuary was 20 cubits long, matching the width of the building, and 10 cubits deep. This porch welcomed the worshiper into the house of the Lord. All along the outer walls of the temple, Solomon built side rooms, each 3 stories high. These rooms surrounded the main structure and served multiple purposes: storage for temple utensils, places for priests, and space for preparation. The rooms were 5 cubits wide on the lowest level, 6 cubits on the middle, and 7 cubits on the top, each level growing wider as it rose. This was made possible because the temple walls were built with inward steps. Importantly, Solomon had the temple constructed using prepared stones, cut and shaped at the quarry. At the building site itself, no hammer, chisel, or iron tool was heard. The work was sacred, and the silence honored God's presence. Everything fit perfectly when it arrived. The entrance to the lower side rooms was on the south side of the temple, and a staircase led up to the middle and upper levels. These stairways allowed access to the chambers that surrounded the sanctuary. As Solomon built the temple, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "As for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws, and keep all my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father. And I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel." God reminded Solomon that the temple was not just stone and gold, it was a covenant. So Solomon continued building the temple. He completed the structure, then lined the interior with cedar boards from floor to ceiling. The walls and floors were covered with wood, and the stone structure was completely hidden. The inner sanctuary, the most holy place, was built at the rear of the temple. It was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high, forming a perfect cube. Solomon overlaid the entire inside of the most holy place with pure gold. He also built an altar of cedar wood and overlaid it with gold. The entire inner sanctuary was overlaid with gold. Walls, floors, ceilings, everything shimmered with the glory of God's presence. Inside the most holy place, Solomon had 2 cherubim carved from olive wood. Each cherub was 10 cubits tall, about 15 feet. One wing of each cherub was 5 cubits, and the other wing was also 5 cubits, so that the total wingspan was 10 cubits. The 2 cherubim stood side by side with their wings outstretched, touching each other in the center of the room and touching the walls on either side. These angelic figures were also overlaid with gold. Solomon had the walls of the temple carved with figures of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. These images were symbolic of Eden, of God's holiness and abundance. Everything was covered in gold, including the floor of the temple. For the entrance to the most holy place, Solomon made doors of olive wood, carved with cherubim, palm trees, and flowers, and overlaid them with gold. The doors to the main sanctuary were made of juniper wood, carved in the same way and placed on rotating doorposts. The inner courtyard was enclosed with 3 rows of dressed stone and a row of cedar beams, beautiful, strong, and carefully arranged. Solomon had started building the temple in the 4th year of his reign, in the month of Ziv. The temple was completed in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month. It took 7 years to complete, and every detail was done exactly according to God's instructions. The house of the Lord now stood in Jerusalem, built not only with stone and gold, but with obedience, reverence, and worship. After finishing the house of the Lord, Solomon turned his attention to building a palace for himself. Though the temple was built in 7 years, his own royal palace took longer. It took 13 years to complete. This was not because he cared more for himself, but because his palace included multiple grand buildings for different purposes, and each one was carefully crafted with beauty and precision. The palace complex began with the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon. This structure was massive. It was 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. That's approximately 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. The building had 4 rows of cedar columns, and on top of these were beams of cedar wood. It got its name because the rows of cedar columns made it look like a majestic forest indoors. The ceiling was made with cedar above the beams, resting on 45 pillars, arranged in rows of 15. Windows were set in 3 rows, facing each other across the hall. All the doorways and entrances had square frames, and each opening was directly across from the next, giving perfect symmetry. The architecture was breathtaking. There was another hall called the Hall of Pillars, which was 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. It had a porch with pillars and a canopy in front. This area served as an impressive entryway to the more formal and royal chambers. Solomon also built the Hall of the Throne, also called the Hall of Judgment. This was where he sat as king to render justice. The hall was paneled with cedar from floor to ceiling. It was a place of great authority, where wisdom and law were declared. Solomon's living quarters were built in a courtyard behind the hall. It was made with the same craftsmanship and materials. He also made a separate house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. Her palace matched the elegance of the king's own. All these buildings were made of high-quality stone, cut and shaped with precision, from the foundations to the top of the walls. The stones were huge and impressive, some being 10 cubits long and others 8 cubits. The foundation itself was laid with large, carefully prepared stones. On top of those were dressed stones and cedar beams. The entire palace complex, courtyards, inner walls, and the great court, was surrounded with 3 rows of hewn stone and a row of cedar beams. It was grand, unified, and majestic. Next, attention shifts back to the temple, as Solomon called for a man named Huram, also called Hiram, from Tyre to help complete the detailed furnishings for the Lord's house. Huram was extremely skilled in bronze work. His mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was from Tyre. Hiram was filled with wisdom and understanding, a master craftsman chosen for a holy task. Hiram began by casting 2 bronze pillars. Each pillar was 18 cubits high, about 27 feet, and 12 cubits in circumference. They were huge and majestic. He made a capital to go on top of each pillar. These capitals were decorated with nets of chainwork, pomegranates, and lily-shaped designs, all carefully cast in bronze. Each capital had 7 chains twisted like ropes. Around the capitals were 2 rows of pomegranates, 100 in total on each pillar. The capitals rose above in a lily pattern, a symbol of beauty and holiness. The 2 pillars were set up at the entrance of the temple. One was placed on the south and called Jachin, which means he establishes, and the other on the north and named Boaz, meaning in him is strength. These names reminded worshippers that God's presence was both stable and strong. Next, Hiram made a huge bronze basin called the sea. It was 10 cubits in diameter, 5 cubits high, and held 2,000 baths of water, roughly 11,000 gallons. It stood on 12 bronze bulls, 3 facing each direction, north, south, east, and west. Their backs faced inward, and the basin rested on their sturdy forms. The basin was cast with great skill. Its rim was decorated with gourds and flowers. The entire piece was one solid cast of bronze, both functional and artistic. It was used by the priests for ceremonial washing before serving in the temple. Hiram also made 10 bronze stands for basins. These stands were 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high. Each stand had panels with carved lions, bulls, and cherubim, framed by decorative borders. The stands had wheels, like a chariot, and handles for easy movement. The craftsmanship was incredible. Every detail had meaning. He placed 5 stands on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north. He also made 10 bronze basins to go on the stands, each holding 40 baths of water, over 200 gallons. These were for washing the tools used in the sacrifice. He completed more furnishings, pots, shovels, sprinkling bowls, and various utensils. Everything was made with exact care. The work was done in the clay ground of the Jordan Valley, between Succoth and Zarethan. The bronze was cast in great quantities and weighed so much it was never calculated. Solomon also made all the gold furnishings for the temple, the gold altar, the gold table for the bread of presence, the gold lampstands, each with intricate flowers, lamps, and tongs. Everything was of pure gold, including bowls, wick trimmers, dishes, censers, and fire pans. Even the doorways and the hinges were covered in gold, both for the inner sanctuary and the main hall. The temple was now fully built, fully furnished, and filled with the glory of beauty and obedience. After years of building, preparing, and obeying, the time had come for one of the most sacred events in Israel's history, the dedication of the temple of the Lord. The structure was finished, the gold glistened, the furnishings were in place. But one thing remained. The Ark of the Covenant, the physical symbol of God's presence, needed to be moved from the old tabernacle and brought into the inner sanctuary of the new temple. Then King Solomon summoned all the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the leaders of the ancestral families. They were called to gather in Jerusalem to bring up the Ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. The event took place during the festival in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month, the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, a fitting time to dedicate the house of the Lord. All the elders came, and the priests took up the ark. The Levites also carried the tent of meeting, the sacred furnishings, and all the holy items that had been used since the days of the wilderness. They brought them with reverence and care. Then King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel gathered before the ark, offering so many sheep and cattle in sacrifice that they could not be counted or recorded. It was an offering of worship, not measured by number, but by the depth of devotion. The priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place, into the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, beneath the wings of the cherubim. The golden cherubim spread their wings over the ark and its poles. The poles were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, though not from outside. Inside the ark were only the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed there at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel after they came out of Egypt. The jar of manna and Aaron's rod were not mentioned here. Only the tablets of the covenant remained. Then when the priests withdrew from the holy place, something happened that left the entire assembly in awe. A cloud filled the temple of the Lord. The priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. This was the same glory that once filled the tabernacle in the wilderness. God had now come to dwell in this permanent house. Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord, facing the entire assembly, and lifted his voice in praise. He said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever." Solomon was overwhelmed by the moment. His voice held both joy and holy fear. He turned toward the people and blessed the whole assembly, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his hands has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to my father David." Solomon recalled how God had said, "Since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city to build a temple, but I have chosen David to rule my people." Then he told them how God had chosen him to build the temple, not David. David had the desire, but Solomon was chosen for the task. And now the temple stood complete. The ark had been brought into the sanctuary. The covenant had been kept. Solomon then stood before the altar, spread out his hands toward heaven, and began to pray the longest recorded prayer in the Bible up to that point. He said, "Lord God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You keep your covenant of love with your servants who walk before you wholeheartedly." He praised God for keeping the promise to David, saying, "You said with your mouth and have fulfilled with your hand, as it is today." Then Solomon made a humble plea, "But will God dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built?" Still, Solomon asked God to hear the prayers made in this place. Whether from kings or common people, whether in celebration or repentance, Solomon asked the Lord to listen from heaven, his dwelling place, and forgive. He prayed for justice. "If someone wrongs their neighbor and is brought here before your altar, judge between the guilty and the innocent." He prayed for national defense. When Israel is defeated by enemies because they sinned, and they turn back and pray, hear from heaven and forgive. He prayed for mercy in drought, for blessing in famine or plague, for restoration when the people sinned and returned to God with all their hearts. He even prayed for foreigners, outsiders who would come to the temple because they heard of God's great name. "When they pray toward this house," Solomon asked, "hear them too, so all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you." Then he prayed for strength in battle, that when the people prayed toward Jerusalem and the temple, God would hear and uphold their cause. Finally, Solomon acknowledged that all people sin, and that Israel would one day be taken captive for their disobedience. He prayed that if they repented, even in exile, and turned back to the Lord with all their heart and soul, praying toward the land and the temple, that God would hear from heaven, forgive them, and restore them. Solomon ended by saying, "May your eyes be open to this temple night and day. Hear the prayers of your servant and your people Israel." He declared, "The Lord is God, there is no other," and urged the people, "Be fully committed to the Lord your God." Then Solomon offered sacrifices to the Lord. He offered 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. The king and all Israel celebrated the dedication. Because the altar could not hold all the offerings, Solomon consecrated the middle courtyard for sacrifices. The celebration lasted 7 days, and then another 7 days. On the 8th day, Solomon sent the people home. They left joyful and glad in heart for all the goodness the Lord had shown to his servant David and his people Israel. After Solomon had completed building the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and everything he desired to accomplish, the Lord appeared to him a second time, just as he had appeared at Gibeon. This divine meeting was not a dream. It was a response to Solomon's great dedication. The Lord said, "I have heard your prayer and your plea. I have consecrated this temple you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there." This was God's sacred seal on the house that Solomon had built. Then the Lord made a conditional promise. "If you walk before me faithfully, as your father David did, with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing all I command, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David." But then came a serious warning. "But if you or your descendants turn away and do not observe my commands and go to serve other gods, I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them. I will reject this temple I have consecrated. It will become a byword and object of ridicule among all nations." He said, "This temple will become a heap of ruins. Everyone who passes by will be appalled and ask, 'Why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple?' The answer would be clear: because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and embraced other gods. God's presence in the temple was real, but his blessing was tied to obedience. The warning was not a threat. It was a reminder of the covenant. Now the chapter shifts to Solomon's other accomplishments. Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, in exchange for the cedar, juniper, and gold Hiram had provided. But when Hiram came to see them, he was displeased. He said, "What kind of towns are these, my brother?" And he called them Kabul, meaning good for nothing. Even so, Hiram had sent Solomon 120 talents of gold. Solomon continued building. He used forced labor to construct the temple, his palace, the terraced walls of Jerusalem, and the cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Gezer had previously belonged to Egypt, but Pharaoh had attacked it and given it to Solomon as a wedding gift when he married Pharaoh's daughter. Solomon rebuilt Lower Beth-horon, Baalath, Tadmor, and all his store cities, chariot cities, and cities for his horses. Whatever Solomon desired to build, he did, throughout Israel and in Lebanon. He conscripted the non-Israelite people, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites who had remained in the land to serve as laborers. Israelites, however, were not forced into slavery. They served as soldiers, officials, commanders, and officers in Solomon's administration. 550 officials supervised the work. Solomon also moved Pharaoh's daughter from the city of David to the palace he built for her. He said, "My wife must not live in the palace of David, king of Israel, because the places where the ark of the Lord has entered are holy." Solomon continued the temple worship. He offered sacrifices 3 times a year, during the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles, as Moses had commanded. The temple service was carried out faithfully, and the priests and Levites performed their duties as David had arranged. Solomon also built ships at Ezion-Geber, near Elath, on the shore of the Red Sea, in Edom. Hiram sent sailors and experienced seamen to work with Solomon's men. Together they sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, an enormous treasure used to enrich Solomon's kingdom even more. Now the fame of Solomon's wisdom had spread far beyond Israel. Rulers of distant lands had heard about this young king who was unlike any other. Among them was the Queen of Sheba, a powerful monarch from a wealthy kingdom in the south, most likely modern-day Yemen or Ethiopia. When the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame concerning the name of the Lord, she was curious. She came to test him with hard questions. This was no friendly visit for show. She came with purpose, to see if Solomon's wisdom was real. She arrived in Jerusalem with a very great caravan. Camels carried spices, very much gold and precious stones. Her gifts were fit for a king, but her mission was to uncover truth. She entered Solomon's palace and spoke with him about everything on her heart. And Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing too difficult for him, nothing hidden, nothing confusing. Every mystery she brought was met with clarity and understanding. When the Queen of Sheba saw all that Solomon had built, his palace, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attire of his servants, the cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. The Hebrew text says there was no more spirit in her. She was utterly amazed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your words and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe it until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. Your wisdom and wealth exceed everything I heard." Then she praised his people. "How happy your people must be! How blessed are these officials who always stand before you and hear your wisdom!" She recognized that this greatness was not from Solomon alone. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. Then she gave Solomon her gifts: 120 talents of gold, about 4 tons, a huge quantity of spices and precious stones. The spices she gave were so abundant and rare that never again were such spices brought to Israel. In return, Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for in addition to gifts from his royal bounty. Then she and her entourage returned to her land, satisfied and honored. Meanwhile, the prosperity of Solomon continued. The weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents, roughly 25 tons, not including what merchants, traders, kings of Arabia, and governors of the land brought. Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold, each using 600 shekels of gold, and 300 smaller shields, each using 3 minas of gold. He placed them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon, showcasing the wealth and might of his kingdom. He also made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps with a rounded back, arm rests, and lions standing beside them. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, 6 on each side. No other throne in the world was like it. All of Solomon's drinking vessels were made of gold. All the articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were made of pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. Solomon had a fleet of trading ships sailing with Hiram's ships every 3 years, returning with treasures: gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. So King Solomon became greater in riches and wisdom than all the kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had placed in his heart. Every visitor brought gifts, articles of silver and gold, garments, weapons, spices, horses, and mules, year after year. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. He stationed them in chariot cities and with him in Jerusalem. He ruled over all the kings from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines and the border of Egypt. He made silver as common as stones in Jerusalem, and cedar wood as plentiful as sycamore trees in the lowlands. Horses were imported from Egypt and other lands through his traders. Solomon's wisdom, wealth, and wonder left a mark that would never be forgotten. And the temple he built for the Lord became the center of worship for all of Israel. For all the wisdom, power, and glory Solomon had, the greatest battle he faced was not with armies or politics, it was with his own heart. And as the years passed, that heart began to drift from the God who had given him everything. King Solomon loved many foreign women. Along with Pharaoh's daughter, he took wives from the nations that the Lord had specifically warned Israel about: Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. God had commanded, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." But Solomon clung to these women in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. This wasn't just a personal weakness. It was also a political strategy: alliances through marriage. But Solomon's great sin was this: his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart away from other gods. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, his God, as the heart of David, his father, had been. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. This wasn't just tolerance, this was worship. Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He built high places for Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Moloch, the god of the Ammonites, on a hill east of Jerusalem. He built these shrines for all his foreign wives so they could burn incense and offer sacrifices to their gods. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away. God had appeared to him twice. He had clearly commanded him not to follow other gods. Yet Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. Then the Lord said to Solomon, "Because you have done this and have not kept my covenant, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of your father David, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." But even in judgment, God showed mercy. "I will not tear away the whole kingdom, but will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." Then the Lord raised adversaries against Solomon. The first was Hadad the Edomite, from the royal family of Edom. When David had destroyed Edom, Hadad, a young boy, escaped to Egypt with some Edomite officials. Pharaoh gave Hadad land and food, and he even married Pharaoh's sister-in-law. When Hadad heard David and Joab were dead, he said, "Let me go back to my country." Though Pharaoh asked why, Hadad insisted. His return was not peaceful. He became an enemy of Israel. God also raised another adversary, Rezon, son of Eliada, who had fled from his master, Hadadezer, king of Zobah. Rezon gathered men and became the leader of a band of rebels. He settled in Damascus and ruled over Aram. Rezon was hostile toward Israel all the days of Solomon's life. But the most dangerous threat came from within Israel itself. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, a young man from Zerida in Ephraim, one of Solomon's officials. His mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow. Jeroboam was capable and hardworking, and Solomon put him in charge of the entire labor force of the tribe of Joseph. One day, as Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite met him. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. Suddenly he took the cloak and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. God explained that Solomon had forsaken him and worshipped other gods. Ahijah continued, "But I will not take the whole kingdom from Solomon. I will give him 1 tribe for the sake of David and Jerusalem." Then he looked directly at Jeroboam and said, "If you walk in obedience to me and do what is right as David did, I will be with you. I will build you a lasting dynasty, just as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you." But Solomon heard about this and tried to kill Jeroboam. So Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Shishak the king, and stayed there until Solomon died. The rest of Solomon's acts, his wisdom, accomplishments, and writings, were recorded in the book of the Annals of Solomon. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Then he died, and he was buried in the city of David, and his son Rehoboam became king after him. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gathered there to make him king. But this was not a peaceful coronation. It was a moment of tension. The people had suffered under heavy labor and taxes during Solomon's reign. Now, with a new king, they wanted change. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had returned from Egypt after Solomon's death, also came to Shechem. The people summoned him, and together they approached Rehoboam with a request. "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy burden he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam replied, "Go away for 3 days, then come back to me." So the people left. Then Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon. He asked, "How would you advise me to answer these people?" They said, "If today you will be a servant to these people, serve them, give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." But Rehoboam rejected their advice. Instead, he consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were now serving him. He asked them, "What is your advice?" The young men replied, "Say to the people, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid a heavy yoke on you. I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions.'" 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned. Rehoboam answered them harshly. He ignored the elders' wisdom and repeated the cruel words of the young men. His answer was brutal. "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." So when the people saw that the king refused to listen, they cried out, "What share do we have in David? What part is Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." And with those words, the kingdom split. The 10 northern tribes rejected Rehoboam and the house of David. Only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to Rehoboam, and soon after, Benjamin joined them. When Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, the people of Israel stoned him to death. Rehoboam fled back to Jerusalem in fear. From that day, Israel rebelled against the house of David, and the split became permanent. When the people of Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned from Egypt, they assembled and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained under Rehoboam's rule. Rehoboam gathered an army of 180,000 soldiers from Judah and Benjamin to fight against Israel and restore the kingdom. But the word of God came to Shemaiah the prophet. He said, "Tell Rehoboam and all the people of Judah and Benjamin, this is what the Lord says. Do not go up to fight your fellow Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing." And Rehoboam obeyed and went home, as the Lord had commanded. Jeroboam, now ruling the north, feared that if people went to Jerusalem to worship, their hearts would return to Rehoboam. So he made a terrible decision. He built 2 golden calves and said, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." He set up one in Bethel and the other in Dan. This became a great sin, and the people began to worship at these false altars. Jeroboam also built shrines on high places and appointed priests who were not Levites. He established a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, copying the one in Judah, and he offered sacrifices on the altars he had made. He went up to Bethel to sacrifice to the calf he had set up. There he installed false priests and led the people into idolatry. The kingdom was now divided, and both parts were being tested, one by pride, the other by false worship. At the very center of Jeroboam's rebellion was a false altar in Bethel, where he had set up one of the golden calves and established unauthorized sacrifices. But God did not remain silent. He sent a prophet, a man of God from Judah, who traveled to Bethel under a direct command from the Lord. This man of God arrived in Bethel just as Jeroboam was standing by the altar, getting ready to burn incense. Boldly and loudly, in front of the king and all the people, the prophet cried out against the altar, speaking the very words of the Lord, "O altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who now burn incense here, and human bones will be burned on you." This was not just a warning, it was a prophecy, detailed and specific, naming a king who would not appear for centuries. To prove that this word was from the Lord, the prophet gave a sign. This altar will be split apart, and the ashes on it will be poured out. When King Jeroboam heard this message against his altar, he was furious. He stretched out his hand from the altar and shouted, "Seize him!" But at that very moment his hand shriveled up and he couldn't pull it back. Then, just as the prophet had said, the altar split apart and the ashes poured out onto the ground. Everyone saw the sign, just as the man of God had declared from the mouth of the Lord. Now trembling, Jeroboam cried out to the man of God, "Please intercede with the Lord your God and pray for me, that my hand may be restored." The man of God prayed to the Lord, and Jeroboam's hand was healed and returned to normal. Astonished and perhaps trying to make peace, Jeroboam invited the man of God. "Come home with me and have something to eat, and I will give you a gift." But the man of God refused. He said, "Even if you were to give me half your possessions, I would not go with you. I will not eat bread or drink water here, for I was commanded by the word of the Lord, you must not eat bread or drink water or return by the way you came." So he left, and he took a different road home than the one he had arrived on. Now, nearby in Bethel lived an old prophet. His sons came and told him everything the man of God had done, including what he said to the king. When the old prophet heard this, he asked, "Which way did he go?" He had his son saddle a donkey, and he rode off after him. He found the man of God sitting under an oak tree and asked, "Are you the man of God who came from Judah?" He replied, "Yes, I am." The old prophet then said, "Come home with me and eat." But the man of God answered, "I cannot go back with you or eat or drink with you in this place." The word of the Lord was clear. You must not eat bread or drink water there or return by the way you came. Then the old prophet lied to him. He said, "I too am a prophet, just like you. An angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord and said, 'Bring him back with you to your house so he may eat and drink.'" But he was deceiving him. The man of God believed the lie. He got up, went back with the old prophet, and ate and drank in his house. While they were sitting at the table, the word of the Lord came to the old prophet who had lied. He suddenly cried out to the man of God, "This is what the Lord says. You have defied the word of the Lord and have not kept the command he gave you. You came back and ate and drank in the place the Lord told you not to. Therefore, your body will not be buried in the tomb of your ancestors." After the meal, the old prophet saddled the donkey for the man of God, and he left. But as he traveled, a lion met him on the road and killed him. His body was left lying in the road, with the donkey and the lion standing beside it. The lion did not eat the body or attack the donkey. It simply stood there, as if guarding the scene. People passing by saw the body and told others in town. When the old prophet heard what happened, he cried, "It is the man of God who disobeyed the Lord's command. The Lord has fulfilled his word." He said to his sons, "Saddle the donkey for me." And he went and found the body lying on the road. The donkey and the lion were still standing beside it. The lion had not eaten or moved the body. The old prophet picked up the body, placed it on the donkey, and brought it back to his own city to mourn and bury him. He laid the body in his own tomb and mourned, saying, "Alas, my brother." He instructed his sons, "When I die, bury me where this man of God is buried. Lay my bones beside his bones. For what he said by the word of the Lord will surely come to pass." Despite this warning and miracle, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways. He continued appointing priests for the high places from among all kinds of people, not from the tribe of Levi. Anyone who wanted to be a priest was consecrated. This became a great sin and led to the downfall and destruction of Jeroboam's house. At that time, Jeroboam's son Abijah became very sick. In fear and desperation, Jeroboam told his wife, "Disguise yourself, so no one will recognize you as the queen, and go to Shiloh. There you will find Ahijah the prophet, the one who told me I would be king. Take him gifts, 10 loaves of bread, some cakes, and a jar of honey, and ask him what will happen to our son." Jeroboam's wife did as he said. She disguised herself and went to Shiloh. Now Ahijah the prophet was very old, and his eyes were blind from age. But the Lord told him ahead of time, "Jeroboam's wife is coming to ask you about her son who is ill. This is what you are to say to her. When she arrives, she will pretend to be someone else." So when she entered Ahijah's house, the old prophet heard her footsteps at the door and called out, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why are you pretending to be someone else? I have been given bad news for you." Then Ahijah spoke the word of the Lord. "Go tell Jeroboam, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I raised you up from among the people and made you leader over my people Israel. I tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. But you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commands and followed me with all his heart. You have done more evil than anyone before you." Ahijah continued with sorrowful boldness, "You have made for yourself other gods, images made of metal. You have turned your back on me. Therefore I am going to bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam. I will cut off every last male in your family, slave or free. I will burn up your family like dung is burned until it is gone. Dogs will eat those who die in the city, and birds will feed on those who die in the country." Then he gave her a personal word. "As for you, go home. As soon as your feet enter the city, your son will die. All Israel will mourn for him and bury him. He is the only one of Jeroboam's house who will be buried, because in him alone the Lord found something good." Then Ahijah gave a terrifying prophecy. "The Lord will raise a king over Israel who will cut off Jeroboam's family. The Lord will strike Israel like a reed swaying in the water. He will uproot Israel from this good land and scatter them beyond the Euphrates, because they angered him with their Asherah poles. He will give them up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he caused all Israel to commit." Jeroboam's wife returned home to Tirzah. As soon as she stepped across the threshold, her son died. They buried him, and all Israel mourned for him, just as the Lord had spoken through the prophet. The rest of Jeroboam's reign, his wars and deeds, were written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. He reigned for 22 years, then died, and his son Nadab succeeded him. Meanwhile, Rehoboam, son of Solomon, ruled in Judah. He was 41 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 17 years in Jerusalem, the city the Lord had chosen to place his name. His mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonite, but Judah also did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They provoked him to jealousy with their sins, building high places, sacred stones, and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land, and the people engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out. In Rehoboam's 5th year, Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem. He carried off the treasures of the temple and the royal palace, including all the gold shields Solomon had made. Rehoboam replaced them with bronze shields and assigned guards to watch them when used during processions to the temple. The rest of Rehoboam's acts are written in the Chronicles of Judah's kings. There was always war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. When Rehoboam died, he was buried in the city of David, and his son Abijah became king in his place. The kingdom of Israel had already been split in two, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. Now, the story shifts back and forth between these two kingdoms, following the kings that reigned in each. Some of these kings followed the Lord, most did not, but through it all, the Lord watched and judged the hearts of each ruler. In the 18th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, a new king rose to power in Judah, Abijah, the son of Rehoboam. He ruled in Jerusalem for 3 years. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom, also known as Absalom, son of David. Abijah did not walk in the ways of the Lord. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David had been. He continued in the sins of his father Rehoboam and did not remove the pagan altars. But for David's sake, the Lord allowed him to rule a little while. The Bible says, "Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by raising up a son after him and by preserving Jerusalem." God remembered David, who had done what was right and kept the Lord's commands, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Because of that covenant, the Lord continued to preserve the dynasty of David, even when his descendants failed. There was war between Abijah and Jeroboam throughout Abijah's reign. The rest of his deeds and battles are recorded in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. When Abijah died, he was buried in the city of David, and his son Asa became king in his place. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, Asa began to reign over Judah. He ruled for a long time, 41 years in Jerusalem. His mother or grandmother was also listed as Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. Asa was different from his father and grandfather. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. He removed the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols that his predecessors had made. In an act of courage and obedience, he even removed his own mother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah. Asa cut it down and burned it in the Kidron Valley. His devotion to the Lord came before family loyalty. Although the high places were not removed entirely, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. He brought into the temple the silver and gold and sacred items that he and his father had dedicated to the Lord. During Asa's reign, there was constant war between Judah and Baasha, king of Israel. Baasha came up against Judah and began to fortify Ramah, just 6 miles from Jerusalem, to control access and pressure Judah economically and militarily. To counter this, Asa took all the silver and gold from the treasuries of the temple and royal palace and sent them as a gift to Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, Syria, who was ruling in Damascus. He said, "Let there be a treaty between us, as there was between our fathers. Break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so he will withdraw from me." Ben-Hadad agreed. He sent his army against Israel and attacked Ijon, Dan, Abel-Beth-Maachah, and other cities in Naphtali. When Baasha heard about it, he stopped building Ramah and withdrew to Tirzah. Then King Asa issued a command to all of Judah. Every man was to help carry away the stones and timber Baasha had been using to build up Ramah. Asa used them to strengthen Geba and Mizpah, 2 fortified cities in his own territory. The rest of Asa's reign, his strength, achievements, and the cities he built, are written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. However, in his old age, Asa was afflicted with a disease in his feet. Despite that, he continued to reign faithfully. When Asa died, he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David, and his son Jehoshaphat became king after him. Meanwhile, in the north, Nadab son of Jeroboam became king of Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. He ruled over Israel for only 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, continuing in the sins of his father Jeroboam, leading Israel to sin. Then Baasha son of Ahijah, from the tribe of Issachar, conspired against Nadab. While Nadab and his army were laying siege to the Philistine city of Gibbethon, Baasha struck him down and killed him. This happened in the 3rd year of Asa, and Baasha became king in Nadab's place. Once he became king, Baasha killed Jeroboam's entire family, fulfilling the word of the Lord spoken through Ahijah the prophet. Not one male from Jeroboam's family was left alive. This was God's judgment for Jeroboam's sins and for leading Israel into idolatry. Baasha reigned for a while, but he also did evil in the eyes of the Lord, continuing the sinful path of Jeroboam. The story was repeating itself. Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, a prophet and son of Hanani. This message was directed against Baasha, king of Israel. God said, I lifted you up from the dust and made you ruler over my people Israel. But you walked in the ways of Jeroboam and led my people into sin. Because of this, the Lord declared, I will destroy your house, Baasha, just like I destroyed the house of Jeroboam. Dogs will eat those who die in your city, and birds will eat those who die in the countryside. The rest of Baasha's acts, his accomplishments and power, are written in the Chronicles of Israel's kings. When he died, he was buried in Tirzah, and his son Elah became king after him. In the 26th year of Asa, Elah son of Baasha became king over Israel. He reigned in Tirzah for 2 years. While Elah was at Tirzah drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, the official in charge of the palace, one of his commanders, Zimri, who led half the chariots, conspired against him. Zimri entered, struck him down, and killed him. This happened in the 27th year of Asa, and Zimri made himself king. As soon as Zimri took the throne, he killed the entire family of Baasha. He left no relatives, not a single male, not even friends or allies. He completely destroyed the house of Baasha, just as the Lord had warned through Jehu the prophet. This was punishment for all Baasha's evil in leading Israel into idolatry. Zimri's rule, however, lasted only 7 days. The army was camped at Gibbethon, fighting the Philistines. When they heard that Zimri had assassinated the king, they made Omri, the commander of the army, king that very day. So Omri and the army marched up from Gibbethon and laid siege to Tirzah. When Zimri saw the city was taken, he went into the royal palace, set it on fire, and died in the flames. He died for the sins he had committed, walking in the ways of Jeroboam. The rest of Zimri's brief reign is written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. At that time, Israel was split in opinion. Half of the people supported Tibni son of Gineth, while the other half supported Omri. Eventually, Omri's supporters prevailed. Tibni died, and Omri became king. In the 31st year of Asa, Omri became king of Israel and ruled for 12 years. He ruled 6 years in Tirzah. Then he bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver. He built a city there and named it Samaria after Shemer. But Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did even more wickedness than all the kings before him. He followed all the sins of Jeroboam, causing Israel to sin and provoking the anger of the Lord. Omri's other acts are recorded in the Chronicles of Israel's kings. When he died, he was buried in Samaria, and his son Ahab became king after him. In the 38th year of Asa, Ahab son of Omri became king over Israel. He reigned in Samaria for 22 years, and Ahab did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any before him. He not only continued in Jeroboam's sins, but he married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve and worship Baal. He built a temple for Baal in Samaria, and even made an altar for Baal inside it. Ahab also made an Asherah pole, and he did more to provoke the Lord to anger than all the kings before him. His reign brought darkness. During Ahab's time, a man named Heel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho, even though it was under God's curse. As he laid the foundation, his firstborn son Abiram died. As he set the gates, his youngest son Segub died, just as the Lord had spoken through Joshua son of Nun centuries earlier. Out of nowhere, during one of the darkest periods in Israel's history, a bold figure appeared. His name was Elijah, a prophet from Tishbe in Gilead, and he was not afraid to confront kings or speak directly for God. He came with a message not from man, but from the Lord. Elijah stood before King Ahab, the wicked ruler of Israel, and declared, "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain in the next few years except at my word." This was no symbolic threat. Elijah was pronouncing a drought over the entire land, one that would last for years. It was God's direct judgment on a nation that had turned to Baal, the so-called storm god, who was believed to bring rain. This was God's way of proving who truly held power over the skies. After delivering the message, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, telling him to leave the area. God said, "Turn east and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan." There God promised to provide for him. "You will drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." So Elijah obeyed. He went to the Kerith ravine and stayed there, just as God told him. Every morning and every evening ravens brought him bread and meat, and he drank water from the brook. It was a miracle of provision, God using birds to feed his prophet, while the rest of the land began to wither under the drought. But as time passed, the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah again. "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So Elijah traveled to Zarephath, a Gentile city outside of Israel. When he reached the town gate, he saw a widow gathering sticks. He called to her and said, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he added, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." She stopped and turned to him. Her voice revealed her desperation. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she said, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you've said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." She obeyed. She went home and made the bread. And just as Elijah had said, there was food every day for Elijah, for the woman, and for her household. The flour was not used up, and the oil did not run dry. It was a miracle of daily provision, quiet, steady, and sufficient. Sometime later, however, the widow's son became ill. He grew worse and finally stopped breathing. In agony, the woman cried out to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Elijah replied gently, "Give me your son." He took the boy from her arms, carried him upstairs to the room where he was staying, and laid him on the bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Elijah stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." And the Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him back downstairs. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Overwhelmed, the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." After a long time, 3 years into the devastating drought, the word of the Lord came to Elijah again, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." The time of judgment was about to end, and a new demonstration of God's power was coming. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab, The famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel, Ahab's wife, had been killing the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had hidden 100 prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. Ahab said to Obadiah, "Let's go through the land to find grass for the horses and mules so we can keep the animals alive." So they divided the land between them. Ahab went in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking, Elijah met him. Obadiah bowed to the ground and asked, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," Elijah replied. "Go tell your master, Elijah is here." But Obadiah was afraid. "What have I done wrong that you would hand me over to Ahab to be killed? If I go tell him and the Spirit of the Lord carries you away before he sees you, he will kill me. I've worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard how I hid 100 prophets when Jezebel was killing them?" Elijah assured him, "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." So Obadiah went to Ahab and delivered the message, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, he said, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah stood his ground. "I have not made trouble for Israel," he said, "but you and your father's house have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." Then Elijah issued a challenge. "Send and gather all Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word to all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah stood before the people and said, "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls, let them choose one and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on wood with no fire. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God." The people agreed. "What you say is good," they replied. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose your bull and go first. There are many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not set fire to it." So they prepared the bull and called on Baal from morning until noon. They shouted, "O Baal, answer us!" But there was no response. No one answered. They danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to mock them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to the people, "Come here to me." They came near, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one for each of the 12 tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the Lord had said, "Your name shall be Israel." With these stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. He dug a trench around it large enough to hold gallons of water. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." They did so. "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he said, and they did it the 3rd time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell. It burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil. It even licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell face down and cried, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Then Elijah commanded, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone escape." They seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered them there. Then Elijah said to Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rain." So Ahab went to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. He told his servant, "Go and look toward the sea." The servant went and came back. "There is nothing there," he said. Elijah said, "Go back." He sent him 7 times. The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose, and a heavy rain began to fall, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. And the power of the Lord came on Elijah. He tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. After the fire of the Lord fell on Mount Carmel and the prophets of Baal were destroyed, Elijah thought revival had come. But news quickly reached Jezebel, the wicked queen. She was not moved by God's power. Instead, she was furious. Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, how he had called down fire from heaven, and how he had killed all the prophets of Baal. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah with a chilling threat, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them." Elijah, who had just stood boldly before a king and false prophets, was now overwhelmed by fear. He ran for his life, fleeing south to Beersheba in Judah. There he left his servant and went a day's journey into the wilderness, alone and broken. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." He lay down and fell asleep under the tree. But the Lord had not abandoned him. As he slept, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around and saw bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. A second time the angel returned, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So Elijah got up, ate, and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, also known as Mount Sinai. There he went into a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah poured out his heart. "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty, but the Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore through the mountains and shattered rocks, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind came a mighty earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper, a still, small voice. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then the voice said again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah repeated his cry, "I have been very zealous, but I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me." But God gave him a different perspective. He said, "Go back the way you came. Go to the desert of Damascus. When you arrive, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu king over Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death those who escape Jehu." Then God said something Elijah had never expected. "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him." So Elijah left the mountain with a new purpose. He found Elisha, son of Shaphat, plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. Elisha was with the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak over him, a sign of calling. Elisha left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." Elijah said, "Go back. What have I done to you?" So Elisha went home, took his yoke of oxen, slaughtered them, burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat, and gave it to the people to eat. Then he left everything and became Elijah's servant. While Elijah was being called deeper into God's presence, events in Israel turned toward battle. Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered 32 kings with their horses and chariots and marched against Samaria. He besieged the city, cutting it off. He sent messengers into Samaria to King Ahab, saying, "This is what Ben-Hadad says, 'Your silver and gold are mine, and the best of your wives and children are mine.'" Ahab, timid and weak, replied, "Just as you say, my lord the king. I and all I have are yours." But Ben-Hadad wasn't finished. The messengers returned with more demands. "I will send my officials to search your palace and your officials' houses. They will take everything you value." This time, Ahab consulted the elders of the land. They advised him not to give in. Ahab sent back word, "Tell my lord the king, I will give what you first asked, but not this second demand." Ben-Hadad was enraged. He swore, "May the gods deal with me severely if enough dust remains in Samaria to give each of my men a handful." Ahab sent back a sharp reply, "One who puts on his armor should not boast like one who takes it off." Ben-Hadad and his kings were drinking in their tents when he heard this. He commanded his men to prepare for attack. But then a prophet came to Ahab and gave a surprising word. "This is what the Lord says. Do you see this vast army? I will give it into your hand today, and you will know that I am the Lord." Ahab asked, "By whom?" The prophet replied, "By the young officers of the provincial commanders." Ahab asked, "Who will start the battle?" The prophet said, "You will." So Ahab mustered the young officers, 232 of them, then 7,000 troops behind them. At noon, when Ben-Hadad and his kings were still drunk, the young officers advanced. Ben-Hadad's scouts reported, "Men are advancing from Samaria." He said, "If they've come in peace, take them alive. If they've come to fight, take them alive." But the young officers struck down the enemy. Then the army of Israel joined in. The Arameans fled, and Ben-Hadad escaped on horseback with a few riders. Israel inflicted a great defeat. Then the prophet warned Ahab, "Strengthen your position. The king of Aram will attack again next spring." Meanwhile, Ben-Hadad's officials advised him, "Their gods are gods of the hills. That's why they were too strong. Let us fight them on the plains. We'll surely win." So they planned a new attack, trained a new army, and waited for spring. At springtime, Ben-Hadad mustered his army at Aphek. The Israelites also gathered. They looked like two small flocks of goats, while the Arameans covered the countryside. A man of God came again and said, "Because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and not of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands. Then you will know that I am the Lord." For 7 days, the two armies camped opposite each other. On the seventh day, battle was joined, and the Israelites killed 100,000 Aramean soldiers in 1 day. The rest fled to Aphek, but the city wall collapsed on 27,000 more. Ben-Hadad fled to an inner room. His officials said, "Let's go to the king of Israel with sackcloth and ropes and beg for mercy." So they approached Ahab and said, "Ben-Hadad says, 'Let me live.'" Ahab said, "Is he still alive? He is my brother." Ben-Hadad came out, and Ahab received him with kindness. They made a treaty, and Ahab let him go free. But God was not pleased. A prophet disguised himself with a bandage and waited by the road. When Ahab passed, the prophet acted out a scene, pretending to be a soldier who lost a prisoner he was supposed to guard. Ahab said, "You have judged yourself." Then the prophet tore off his disguise and said, "This is what the Lord says. You have set free a man I had determined should die. Therefore, it is your life for his life, your people for his people." Ahab went back to his palace in Samaria sullen and angry. Though he had won the war, he had disobeyed God. His heart was troubled, not because of sin, but because of pride. In the city of Jezreel, near the royal palace, there was a man named Naboth, who owned a beautiful vineyard. This vineyard had likely been in his family for generations. It wasn't just land, it was heritage, memory, and blessing. King Ahab, whose palace overlooked this vineyard, wanted it for himself. He said to Naboth, "Let me have your vineyard to use as a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. I will give you a better vineyard in its place, or, if you prefer, I'll pay you whatever it's worth." But Naboth answered, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors." His refusal wasn't about business. It was about God's law. According to the Torah, ancestral land was not to be permanently sold or traded. Ahab went home sullen and angry. He lay on his bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat. Like a spoiled child, the king sulked. Then Jezebel, his wife, came in and asked, "Why are you so sullen? Why won't you eat?" Ahab told her what Naboth had said and how he had refused to give up his vineyard. Jezebel said, "Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth." So Jezebel took matters into her own hands. She wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with the royal seal, and sent them to the elders and nobles in Naboth's city. She instructed them, "Proclaim a fast and seat Naboth in a prominent place, but then seat 2 scoundrels across from him who will accuse him, saying, 'Naboth has cursed both God and the king.' Then take him out and stone him to death." The elders and nobles, either afraid or complicit, did exactly as Jezebel instructed. They held the fast, seated Naboth, and brought in false witnesses. The men shouted, "Naboth has cursed God and the king." And the people took him outside and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, "Naboth is dead." As soon as she heard the news, Jezebel went to Ahab and said, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard. Naboth is no longer alive." Ahab immediately went to the vineyard to claim it as his own without remorse. But the Lord saw everything. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, Go down to meet Ahab in Samaria. He is now in Naboth's vineyard where he has gone to take possession. Say to him, have you not murdered a man and seized his property? So Elijah went. He found Ahab and delivered God's word. This is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours. Ahab said to Elijah, so you have found me, my enemy. Elijah replied, I have found you because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. He says, I am going to bring disaster on you. I will wipe out your descendants. I will cut off from Ahab every last male, slave or free. I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam and Baasha, because you have provoked me and led Israel into sin. Then Elijah gave a word specifically about Jezebel. Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. He also said, dogs will eat those belonging to Ahab who die in the city, and the birds will feed on those who die in the country. The scripture adds, there was never anyone like Ahab, who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, urged on by Jezebel his wife. He behaved in the vilest manner by following idols. But when Ahab heard these words, something unexpected happened. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and fasted. He lay in sackcloth and went around meekly. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah again. Have you noticed how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring this disaster in his day, but in the days of his son. Even in judgment, God remained just and merciful. For 3 years, there was peace between Aram, Syria, and Israel. But in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, came to visit Ahab, king of Israel. Though their kingdoms had different spiritual directions, the two kings were trying to form alliances, often dangerous ones. During this visit, Ahab said to his officials, don't you know that Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us? Yet we are doing nothing to retake it from the king of Aram. He then turned to Jehoshaphat and asked, will you go with me to fight against Ramoth-Gilead? Jehoshaphat replied, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. But then he wisely added, first seek the counsel of the Lord. So Ahab brought together about 400 prophets and asked them, shall I go to war against Ramoth-Gilead or shall I refrain? They all replied, go, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. But Jehoshaphat wasn't satisfied. He asked, is there no longer a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of? Ahab reluctantly said, there is still one man through whom we can inquire of the Lord, Micaiah son of Imlah. But I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, but always bad. Jehoshaphat said, the king should not say that. So Ahab summoned an officer and said, bring Micaiah at once. As the two kings, dressed in their royal robes, sat on their thrones at the threshing floor by the entrance of the gate of Samaria, all the prophets were prophesying before them. One prophet, Zedekiah, made iron horns and declared, this is what the Lord says, with these you will gore the Arameans until they are destroyed. And all the prophets echoed, go up to Ramoth-Gilead and triumph. Meanwhile, the messenger who went to get Micaiah said to him, look, all the other prophets are predicting success for the king. Let your word agree with theirs and speak favorably. But Micaiah replied, as surely as the Lord lives, I can tell him only what the Lord tells me. When he arrived, Ahab asked, Micaiah, shall we go to war or not? Micaiah answered sarcastically, attack and be victorious, the Lord will give it into your hands. But the king knew he was mocking him. "How many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" Then Micaiah gave the true vision. "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, 'These people have no master. Let each go home in peace.'" Ahab turned to Jehoshaphat and said, "Didn't I tell you? He never prophesies anything good about me." Micaiah continued, "Listen to the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing around him. The Lord said, 'Who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth-Gilead so he falls?' One spirit said this, another that. Finally, a spirit came forward and said, 'I will entice him.' 'How?' the Lord asked. He said, 'I will be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets.' And the Lord said, 'Go and do it.' Then Micaiah declared, 'So now the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these prophets. The Lord has decreed disaster for you.' Zedekiah slapped Micaiah in the face. 'Which way did the spirit from the Lord go when he went from me to speak to you?' he mocked. Micaiah replied, 'You will find out on the day you go to hide in an inner room.' Ahab ordered, 'Put Micaiah in prison and give him nothing but bread and water until I return safely.' Micaiah said, 'If you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me. Mark my words, all you people.' So Ahab and Jehoshaphat went up to Ramoth-Gilead. But Ahab disguised himself before battle, while Jehoshaphat wore his royal robes. During the battle, the Aramean king ordered his men, 'Only fight the king of Israel. Ignore everyone else.' They mistook Jehoshaphat for Ahab and surrounded him. But Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him. They realized it wasn't Ahab and turned away. Then a soldier randomly fired an arrow, and it struck Ahab between the sections of his armor. Gravely wounded, Ahab told his chariot driver, 'Wheel around and get me out of the battle.' The battle raged all day. Ahab stayed propped up in his chariot facing the Arameans, but at sunset he died. His blood ran onto the chariot floor. When the army heard of the king's death, a cry went out, 'Every man to his town, every man to his land.' They brought Ahab's body to Samaria and buried him. They washed the chariot at a pool, and dogs licked up his blood, just as the Lord had said. The rest of Ahab's deeds, his ivory palace, his cities, are written in the annals of the kings of Israel. His son Ahaziah succeeded him. Meanwhile, Jehoshaphat reigned in Judah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, though he did not remove the high places. He made peace with Israel, but he also refused to repeat Ahab's corruption. Jehoshaphat died and was buried with his ancestors, and his son Jehoram became king after him. This is the end. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps share God's word with more people. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on powerful biblical teachings. Thanks for watching, and until next time, God bless you.